So when it comes to tackling what's known as hate speech, Britain is probably the most oppressive country in the world. To find nations with less free speech, with more restrictions on their speech, you have to look at usually dictatorial regimes like China, for example. There aren't really any countries that prosecute and deal with hate speech, however you may define that, in the same way as Britain, or to anywhere near the same extent. The data is kind of limited, but what we do have, for example, and we don't have, actually, I can't find any very recent data on this, but for example, in 2018, between January and October, so that's 10 months, 1,515 people just in Merseyside alone, over a 10-month period, were arrested for offensive communications. The majority of these crimes were malicious communications, and secondarily was harassment. Harassment can be very subjective as well. That's just in Merseyside, right? And we have numbers throughout the rest of the UK, for example. 3,395 people, 9 people a day. This was as of 2017, 9 people a day were being arrested. What we have seen from the data we have is that this number is generally trending upwards all the time. I would imagine over the last few years it's gone through the roof. It would be possible to find out through the Freedom of Information Act, but I haven't done so myself. It takes a long time to get a response. It often takes months, and but it's basically, thousands of people, thousands and thousands and thousands of people are being arrested on taxpayer money every year. If I had to, I mean, I guess completely speculative, I would say is probably closer to around 10,000. But I have no idea. That is just it's pointless really for me to even guess. But yeah, it's a huge number of people basically every year are being arrested on taxpayer money for offensive communications, right? Prior to 2003, when we got the Offensive Communications Act, which was specifically designed to target online offences, prior to that we already did have quite strict hate speech laws in principle, not as much in practice, but Public Order Act of 1986 states expressions of racial hatred, if you use threatening, abusive or insulting words or behaviour, or display any written material which is threatening, abusive or insulting, and you appear to be intending to stir up racial hatred, that is punishable by a maximum sentence of up to 7 years in prison. So I've never heard of anybody getting 7 years for anything like this, but it is possible to get 7 years in prison for words that were deemed insulting or offensive. According to the letter of the law, and this isn't some super antiquated, one of those ridiculous laws that's not, this is a relatively modern law. 1986, that is actually a relatively modern law, especially given subsequent online specific updates. A relatively modern law that states that for your choice of words being deemed insulting, you can get 7 years in prison. A judge could give you that, and there might be nothing you could do about it. Again, I mean, in principle, it sounds okay, right? Like, I remember hearing about when I was a kid that there were hate speech laws in the UK, and I thought, I think that's like good. If you racially abuse someone in the street, you send someone a horrible, filled with racial slurs, and you're a really nasty person, and you're really trying to hurt people, and it sounds okay that you could get in trouble for that. That seems reasonable enough. But then you remember who is responsible for enforcing these laws: the government, the police. It was New Labour who brought the Offensive Communications Act into play, and I'll read from the Offensive Communications Act here, right? So Offensive Communications Act. This states, It is an offence to send a message that is grossly offensive or of an indecent, obscene, or menacing character over a public electronic communications network. Grossly offensive. So the same government that waged war in Iraq brought this law into effect that gave basically anybody, really, when it comes to reporting a crime, the power to decide what is or isn't grossly offensive and therefore punishable by jail time, potentially. But also any police department, any judge, the freedom to decide what constitutes grossly offensive. Obviously, grossly offensive is, people's perceptions of what is or isn't grossly offensive are on such a spectrum. Even if you just think based on age groups, for example, think of the things you might watch on TV, the type of comedy you might enjoy compared to what your parents enjoy. Now consider what your grandparents might enjoy, right? The type of comedy they would consider over the line, they might consider offensive. I mean, sadly, in some respects, we have actually gone almost backwards in that sense. There's stuff even like Monty Python were doing that could potentially land you in trouble. But generally speaking, yeah, I mean, there's a huge difference between the type of thing that you would kind of see as normal and understand is maybe not so offensive or is contextual or is whatever, is just funny to you, but that an older person might think was horrible. Then if you imagine, for example, swapping the genders, whether you're a man or a woman, imagine what you might consider or not consider to be grossly offensive and what someone of the opposite sex might consider to be grossly offensive. Then imagine different races, what people from different racial groups, cultural backgrounds, economic backgrounds might consider to be grossly offensive. Even taking individuality out of the picture and just looking at people in terms of groups, it's very clear that most groups, broadly speaking, will have a very different definition of what is or isn't grossly offensive, right? It's just beyond subjective. It's subjective to the point of, in terms of a law, being utterly meaningless, and all that it really is power that can be wielded against you. And there's been this ongoing free speech debate for a while now, and it's mostly come from the right, and it has been branded as almost like a right-wing concept. Like free speech has been branded as like a kind of in itself offensive kind of right-wing concept that you only talk about if secretly what you really want is just to call people the N-word on the internet and not get in trouble for it, and to be allowed to be racist, and that, there's no other possible reason why you might even just in principle not agree with the idea of the government being able to decide whether or not something you said was offensive. And whether or not you should go to prison for it. Our society in Britain was not built on this. It wasn't built on this level of oppression of thought and ideas and expression. It just wasn't. To be able to speak freely is to be able to think freely. And it's again, it can seem reasonable when you just think about it and you think, yeah, okay, like arresting people for racism, for example, seems fine. But let's look at some of the case studies, some of the actual examples of these laws being applied. So some of these you might have heard before, some of them are quite high profile. So police arrest 12-year-old boy after racist messages are sent to Wilfred Zaha. Look, whatever the boy said, I'm guessing he said the N-word. It was wrong. It was wrong for him to do that. He's a 12-year-old boy, though. He's a 12-year-old boy who should not be on social media. His parents should be punishing him for speaking to people like that. He should not be speaking to anybody like that, not because he's legally compelled not to do so, because, I mean, if he thinks that's okay, if he thinks it's okay to speak to somebody like that, to be so abusive towards somebody else, you can ban the use of any words, you can prosecute him for whatever. It's not going to change the feeling, it's not going to change where that comes from, it's not going to change the disconnect between him and that person, Again, I mean, above all else, he's a 12-year-old boy. He's a 12-year-old boy. think of what you were, the things you're capable of when you're a 12-year-old. Like, most 12-year-olds are not nice. They're selfish people. They're just, I'm not saying when I was 12 we all went around calling people the N-word and racially abusing footballers on Twitter. It's actually kind of abnormal that he was doing that. But the police on taxpayer money went to a 12-year-old boy's house and arrested him because he racially abused Wilfred Zaha on Twitter. There is an issue of perspective when it comes to racial abuse in football. I do feel there is a problem with when you have there are 8 or 9 billion people in the world, right? Like, in most crowds of people, you're in a big crowd of people. There'll be people in that crowd who have murdered people. There'll be people in that crowd who are paedophiles. There'll be people in that crowd who abuse their own children. There will be all manner of bad people in that crowd. And to focus specifically when, for example, a footballer has like 20,000 messages and comments on their Instagram, and one of them is a 12-year-old boy calling them the N-word, I'm not sure this is the urgent situation it's presented to be. It's clearly not nice, and it shows, what people are like, and people can be very abusive and nasty and mean. It's one of the many ways we can hurt and upset each other. I'm not sure it's such a pressing issue. I'm not sure it's the pressing issue it's made out to be. I don't think these people are anywhere near representative of the majority. When I go on a footballer's Instagram page, I usually see nothing but people kissing their asses, to be honest. And I see that they earn infinitely more than normal people. They get infinitely more attention. Praise is heaped on top of them, and there's also often some harsh criticism and sometimes some like nasty remarks. And it's horrible and no one should do it. But I think it's been given treated with a level of kind of urgency and seriousness that is possibly a little bit over the top. I've had a lot of abusive messages on the internet over the years, a lot of words that people have used towards me that they could easily get arrested for under these laws. I would never, ever, ever, ever want anybody to be arrested for calling me the R word or the F word or whatever else it is. I would never, ever want anybody to be arrested for it. I can't imagine ever feeling that way, to be honest. And I understand. I'm coming at it from a different perspective, racially and everything else. I understand that. I just don't think the government are the answer here, and I'll get on to why. But okay, so that was one example. And that is one where the communication was offensive. I mean, there is no, there's really no justification for sending like racial abuse to these guys on Twitter. There really isn't. It's not an acceptable thing to do. Still, arguably, the police response was incredibly heavy-handed. So then we have this woman who was arrested for a hate crime for posting grossly offensive rap lyrics on Instagram. So, 19-year-old Chelsea Russell was arrested for quoting lyrics to rapper Snap Dogg's "I'm Trippin'" in her Instagram bio. The lyric from the chorus of the song that she put in her Instagram bio of a song that she obviously liked was "Killer Snitch, nah, robber rich, nah." The N-word, soft A N-word. According to the report, Russell posted the lyrics to pay tribute to 13-year-old Frankie Murphy, who was killed in a car accident last year, although it's unclear how the lyrics are related to him. Yeah, it is unclear how the lyrics are related to him. Regardless, she's posting the lyrics to a rap song that she likes. One of the arresting officers in this case, requested that the defence not use the word in their defence because it was too offensive to be used in court. This word, if you go on Google and you type lyrics, the word lyrics, and you type this word, you'll get 20 million results. It's endless, right? I mean, it is endless. This word was deemed so offensive it could not be used in court. It's one thing to focus on, she was white, she shouldn't have used it, whatever. But the fact is, this word that is so commonplace was deemed too offensive to be used in a court case about the use of the word itself. I think we've gone off the deep end a little bit, quite frankly. And I don't want to engage in whataboutism because it is pointless, but the police are there to deal with serious crimes, serious incidents, real things. And when you give them this power, this is what happens. They should have as little power as possible with respect to our safety. I want them to have enough power to keep us safe, to protect us, to genuinely protect the interests of our society as a whole, and that's all. We should not be giving them more power than is necessary. We shouldn't be just throwing away our own freedoms, our own rights, just because we don't like the idea that a white girl might use that word, and we think, yeah, I'm happy for her to get arrested. What we're seeing now, for example, with these protests about the Queen, and I kind of don't entirely agree that this is a free speech issue because some of it comes under disturbing the peace. And I think that, for example, if you're shouting at a funeral, and to be fair, I haven't kept up to date with this situation with the Queen and the protesters, but if you're shouting at a funeral, I do think you should be able to be arrested for that. And there are laws just relating to public order and keeping the peace. I don't know exactly what's gone down here, but what is clear is that a lot of people who typically would laugh at the idea of free speech and refer to it as a kind of racist concept or something are now decrying the loss of their free speech, which is exactly what us who are interested in it have said all along. Is basically you might think it's great that Count Dankula or this girl are being arrested for things that they said or did. It will happen to you or somebody like you one day. It just will. It's the same way that all of these laws that were brought in after 9/11 to hunt for terrorists, they're all used to just spy on you and just used to give power-hungry psychopaths more power, basically. The government never want less power. They never want less. They never want less power to take away your rights. They never, they don't. They want as much of it as possible. If you say to them, I want to be able to be indefinitely detained for no reason, with no probable cause, because the police feel like it, the government will be like, yeah, sure, yeah, that sounds great. Let's put this into our legal system. Anything you give them in terms of giving away your freedom, your liberties, your rights, they're going to take it. They want it. They want to take away your freedom because realistically, most people who are in these positions are just addicted to power. That is why they do it. Why, for example, in China right now, are people having to do COVID tests every 2 days? And if there's one case, they lock down a whole region. Why? Is that because there's a genuine concern? Of course it's not. It's ridiculous. They're destroying the economy. They're destroying the people's relationship with the government. People who actually previously tolerated a lot of this crap are now saying, no, enough's enough. I can't do anything. I can't go anywhere. I can't move. I have no freedom. I don't like this. There's no logical reason for it, except they just love doing it. They love power. They love grabbing a hold of these people and not letting go. It's just what they do. It's just what happens. It's just there are dynamics at play that normal people can't relate to. We can't understand how somebody could get a thrill out of waging a war in a foreign country. We can't understand that because we're normal. And even if we weren't normal, most of us have never had the requisite level of power to access those emotions, and those feelings, and those desires. Like, it's not relatable to us. So we assume, oh yeah, I'll give you guys the keys to my mind and my capacity for expression. Yeah, just take the keys. I trust you. It's fine. Don't trust them with it. They're not a safe pair of hands when it comes to your freedom. I don't want the freedom to be able to murder people and steal things, and I don't want other people to have that freedom. I do want the freedom to be able to say bad things. I do want the freedom to be able to offend people, whatever that means. It is genuinely now considered a crime to offend somebody. It's so ridiculous, it's hard to even talk about. It's just a complete and utter embarrassment that we accept this in the UK, basically. Let's go back to a couple of other case studies. So this girl, this girl, so initially she was given a £650 fine, she was put under house arrest, and she was made to wear an ankle bracelet for something she posted on Instagram. She was made to wear an ankle bracelet. So she was quoting a rap lyric. And look, I mean, be honest, right? Like, if you listen to rap, you've been listening to it for years, everyone has used that word at some point. Everyone has quoted a movie. Everyone has quoted lyrics or sung along to a song. It's one thing whether or not you think that's polite in public or you think people should do it. The idea that was criminalized in this particular incident is beyond farcical. It's just unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable. It's unbelievable that this happened and people just thought, yeah, I mean, because quite easy, if they wanted to, right, they could make this front page news. The media, if they wanted to, and the powers that be, they can push any story into prominence. They can make anything become a big deal. Anything that has the potential, as the potential to be as sensational as this, they can make it front page news. They can make it a big deal, and they can get people talking about it. They don't want people to talk about it. Real power moves in silence. They silently, sneakily, quietly take away as much as they can from you, and you turn around and you notice it, and by then it's normal to you. You don't even think about it anymore. It's just what happens. So anyway, yeah, it was overturned. A year later, this verdict was overturned after obviously a huge amount of drama, presumably tens of thousands, if not more, being spent on all of this. More, it would have been more. An enormous amount of your money, if you're a UK citizen, your money, right? Your money was spent in court talking about whether or not it was a criminal offence for this 19-year-old girl to quote a rap lyric with a soft A N-word in her Instagram bio. This is the problem when you let the police and the government have jurisdiction over things like this. It's crazy. It's insane. The arresting officer, the more you read about this case, you just see that this woman is just absurd. People like this exist in the police force, right? I mean, like, they exist, and if they have the power, if you give them this power to abuse, they will. It's really not doing anything for you in your life anyway. It's not protecting you from anything. It's not protecting you from hatred. It's not protecting you from bad feelings that people might have about you. It's not protecting you from bad feelings you might have about yourself. People can find other ways to communicate those things. The world can communicate that to you quite easily, in a way that avoids breaching these rules, despite how insanely subjective and far-reaching they are. So we've had that case, right? And then, obviously, the Count Dankula case is pretty famous. He dressed his dog as a Nazi. He said in the video, "My girlfriend loves her dog. He's really cute. I want to make it into the least cute, the worst thing I could think of. So I made the dog into a Nazi." It's very on the nose, edgy humour. Like, it's not really my kind of humour, just because it's a bit like, it's quite basic humour to me. It's like, it's not particularly shocking or edgy. It's just kind of like, whoa, Nazis, you know, like, it's not even offensive is what I'm trying to say. Like, it's not even, you know, it gets way worse than that. It's quite silly. I mean, like, you can take it back even to things, again, like Fawlty Towers, Basil Fawlty doing the Nazi walk. A lot of people, especially back then, would not have liked that. A lot of people, there were a lot of men alive at that time who fought in World War II. It would have been to them offensive to see, so not to all of them, some of them, probably most of them, would have loved it and thought it was hilarious and whatever else. But there are a huge number of people who would have found that unpleasant, to see him marching around like Hitler and putting his fingers over his mouth like a moustache, right? But it's essentially the same kind of thing. It's using shocking or extreme kind of Nazi iconography and imagery and ideas to create a kind of either some sort of juxtaposition or just a shock value comedy. It's very simple, and the overwhelming majority of people understand that. Clearly, in this case, the authorities didn't. It was seen as, I mean, in this case, it was a tiny bit different, because he actually said in the video the phrase "gas the Jews" to the dog. It was seen as an incitement of violence, which is pretty hilarious when you're saying it to a dog who has no capability of, you know, but it was seen as an incitement of violence, which is a tiny bit different. But what they said then is that the context didn't matter at all. There was, you know, it didn't make a difference, basically, because he said those words. There was a funny clip outside court where a Sky journalist said that to him, and he said, does context matter? And the guy said no. And then he said, okay, so what was it I said that was so offensive? And the guy said it back to him. And he said, there you go, you've just said it. You know, like, in saying that there's no context in which you should use this phrase, they used this phrase. It's like satire. It's the whole thing, the whole case. It was insane. It was absolutely ridiculous. In the end, he got £1,000 fine and was seen as getting off lucky. I bet it seriously hurt to pay that fine, because it's just an absolute mockery. Crazy. Then there have been a number of people, women's rights activists or people who are sceptical of the trans movement, who've been arrested for offences in this regard. That particular community has been quite happy to use these laws to get people punished. A lot of people have been arrested for that, for their views on gender, sex, science, whatever. Frequently for non-malicious opinions and takes, and just something that is deemed harassment of trans people or a threat to trans people because it contradicts some kind of value that they hold. There's been tons of cases of that. There was one very recently. A man was arrested. This one was crazy. He was handcuffed and arrested at his home for resharing a meme that Lawrence Fox, the actor, had posted, who lives in the UK as well himself. And Lawrence Fox shared this image, and it was the pride flag with a swastika. It's not the best satire I've ever seen. It's kind of childish. I get what they're saying, but it was a bit weird. But that's totally irrelevant. That's just my feeling about it, which, you know, does not matter. He shared this. Thousands of people saw it. Thousands of people shared it. One of the people who reshared it, one of the thousands of people who reshared this post, was arrested. So it's like, you know, 10,000 people shoplift from a shop. It's on camera. Everybody was doing it. Everybody took part. And the shop owner kind of looks around and looks at the videos and goes, him, this one, yeah, arrest him. Everybody else goes free. It's one guy out of all of these people was arrested for it, and we're like, yeah, no, that's fair and proportionate. That makes sense. Yeah, and it obviously, in an ideal world, if you prosecuted everybody for this, that'd be totally doable. Yeah, taxpayers can easily afford that. It's not like they're stretched thin enough as it is. They could easily afford that. We could easily afford to arrest all of these people, everybody else who ever reshared anything deemed to be offensive, every other person who ever used one of these words online. Obviously, we could arrest basically half the population of Britain. More. It would be more. If you're taking everybody who's ever said something that could possibly be deemed as offensive, you're looking at basically everyone who has ever lived in the UK. You're talking about the entire nation coughing up tax pounds to arrest itself, to arrest each other, to just arrest everybody. That would be an even-handed application of these ridiculous, embarrassing laws. So this guy, right, who shared them, he was arrested at his home, he's handcuffed. I believe Lawrence Fox turned up to film it. This guy was a veteran as well. He served 30 years in the army. The meme that he shared caused anxiety. The police said they were arresting him because what he did caused anxiety. It caused anxiety to someone. Okay. It's unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable. It is absolutely unbelievable. He was released, but I mean, should never have happened in the first place. Then we had David Starkey. He was arrested for a podcast. He used slightly, I would agree, slightly odd choice of words. I do think sometimes he could be. I don't know. I think he lets himself down sometimes with his choice of words. I think he's great overall. I really like David Starkey. I think he's a good man and a really honest man. Occasionally, I think he lets himself down with his choice of words. I don't think him letting himself down in that way, in my opinion, I mean, that should ever result in any form of consequences, really, apart from maybe just social ones. Maybe he just alienates people a bit. You know, maybe people might see him talking in this way and think, oh, I don't really like him as much as I thought I did, and maybe this isn't for me, and maybe we don't actually quite feel the same way, and maybe there's a bit more anger in what he's saying than I might like there to be, and I'm not really a huge fan of that. That's the only consequence I think there should be, is just that, you know, people see you as you are, and that's it. That's the beauty of language, you know, and expressing yourself. So he said, the exact quote from David Starkey was, "Slavery was not genocide, otherwise there wouldn't be so many damn blacks in Africa or in Britain, would there?" Which is kind of nonsensical as well for someone that smart to say that. It doesn't really make any sense. And I didn't really understand why he said damn blacks. I don't know if he meant so damn many or he meant so many damn blacks. There is a difference, and one does seem a bit more hateful than the other. But again, to be arrested for it is just, you know, he should have the freedom to say that, and other people should have the freedom to say to him on his Twitter page or whatever and say, why did you say that? You know, you sound like a dick. You sound racist when you say that. And he'll have to deal with people's opinion of him. He'll have to deal with the reality of, you know, what he said and how it makes people feel. Why does there need to be any further consequence at the cost of all of our freedom? Yeah. So, those are a few case studies. There've been a lot more over the years, especially recently. There's been loads. And I think if you take America, for example, where they, legally speaking, they have free speech, there's not a big issue there. There just isn't, you know. people don't like certain things, right? The Westboro Baptist Church are a great example of this. I don't think they should be allowed to picket funerals. I don't think you should be allowed to do that legally. I don't think you should be allowed to interrupt a funeral, and to disturb and to stand outside and to say things to disturb the peace of a funeral. I just think that's wrong, and it is potentially a murky thing to deal with legally, but I do think it's kind of necessary to have some protection in that regard. You can't really have people doing that, because you can't ignore it, you can't avoid it. It's not possible. It is a form of harassment. If somebody says something that you don't like once on the internet, you block that person. You never hear from them again in your life. If somebody turns up at your family member's funeral and they're saying, they've got all these hateful placards and they're saying these things to you, you can't do anything about that yourself, and you can't avoid them, and you can't escape that, and you can't have peace at your family member's funeral. You're not being able, your rights are being infringed upon. So I think there should be laws to protect people from things like that. But in terms of their choice of words and the things that they say, isn't it better to know that the Westboro Baptist Church feel that way? Isn't it better that they don't mask their message in polite language, and then A, be more likely to lure people in, B, hide more easily, and I don't know, there is a C, but basically those two things, like you're hiding the fact that they are racist and homophobic and whatever else they are. You're hiding that from people. And they're still operating as a group. They still feel the same way. They'll still say those things to each other in private. Let them say it in public. Teach kids that when you go out into the world, there's a broad spectrum of opinion out there. There are a lot of people out there. There are a lot of, if you go out in London, there's a lot of different religious people shouting on the street. If you actually get into what they truly believe, sometimes it is not nice. It really is not nice, And then when you talk politically, there are people walking the streets who want communist revolution, and they don't care if it's violent. There are people walking the streets who are far right, and who, to be fair, most of these people, they probably hide their opinions to some extent, and they probably engage in things like dog whistling, as it were, but they exist. There are a lot of people, I've met people who are they have beliefs that they're hard to swallow. They say things to you and it's hard to accept, and it makes it hard to see them in the same way. And that's just part of life. That's just part of life. That's just humans having different opinions on things, different feelings about things. When it comes down to language specifically, it's such a huge can of worms to open up. I just don't think it's worth even trying to begin with to police it. Words, the meaning of words changes. So, for example, the soft AM word, it's a perfect example of a slight alteration of a word that utterly changed the meaning. It completely reversed it. And there are some black people who still find the soft AN word to be basically just as offensive as the original form of that word. There are many people, especially older people, who really don't like it. They really don't like hearing it. And some younger people as well, they refuse to use it and they think it's wrong and they don't think that other black people should use that word. But at the same time, in many circles, it's a term of endearment and solidarity. So it's so subjective. It's just one example of how insanely subjective language could be. And it might seem simple because you say, yeah, but there's black people and there's white people and it depends who's using it, it depends on the context. There's not just black people and white people. There are mixed race people. There are people who are, and mixed race isn't just, you know, a black parent and a white parent. There are seriously mixed race people where it's like very hard to define in one word what they actually are. There are other groups that feel that they have the right to use that word. Latinos. There are a lot of groups that argue that they should be allowed to use that word as well. There are people also who argue that just from having grown up in inner city areas where that word is commonplace and where they were allowed to use it amongst their friends, that it's part of their culture and it's part of their history, and that they shouldn't be denied the right to use it, and that they have more right to use it than someone who is the correct skin colour who grew up in a middle class or suburban area. There are tons of different debates that can be had about that word, and it's so subjective, and you don't respect that subjectivity when the law draws a line like that arbitrarily in individual cases. It doesn't respect the nature of language itself and how much it's changed over the years. And even how much it changes in both directions. Words that were once considered completely normal, for example, words that used to be standard to use for people who are disabled, who are mentally disabled, those words are now considered to be slurs, whereas there was a point in time when that was what a doctor would say. And now, a lot of the time, new phrases and words that we invent for these people end up themselves becoming used as insults. You can't really people, if they want to communicate something, they want to communicate an idea badly enough, like banning a specific word probably isn't going to change that. If they want to communicate their feelings, especially if it's a feeling as like simplistic as hatred or dislike of another person because of something superficial, that's not hard to communicate. You don't need complex language to communicate that. You can just communicate it. People who hate you will hate you, and changing how they express that is not going to change the fact that they hate you. There are other ways to change that. One of the ways to change that, ironically, is through free expression, through people being able to share ideas, through people hearing, if people, have you ever had a situation where you've done something or said something in your social group, for example, and it's been interpreted a certain way, and no one said this to you, and people have interpreted something you've done in completely the wrong way, and then they tell you, it comes out at some point, and you're like, no, that is not what I meant. That's not what happened. That's not what that was about. Thank God you brought this up to me. You ever had that feeling? Like, I've had that feeling a lot. I thought, like, thank God you actually said this, because otherwise you would have gone on stewing over this information. You would have had it in your head, and it would have poisoned you against me, and you never would have known the truth, which is that that's not actually what I said, or I didn't mean it like that, or whatever it is. Like, that's an example of not communicating enough, a breakdown in communication. And the solution is further communication, right? Like, and you might communicate with someone who's a racist or a homophobe or has really offensive beliefs or whatever, and you get to the bottom of it, and by the end you might think, yeah, you're just horrible. That's it, basically. I've tried understanding it. I've tried seeing how it might be, it might be informed by your background or by your political views or your religious views or something else. But in the end, I realised you're just not a very nice person, and that's all. And I know all I need to know now, and bye. Or you might realise, that's not as offensive as I thought it was, actually. When you explain it like that, I realise that you're not such a hateful person. And actually, like, we could probably be friends. Both of those are good things. In both of those situations, you have more clarity through communication than you did before. You have more clarity about that person and your relationship to them. It's always good to know more. It's always good to know more. And the way that you get to know people and their thoughts and feelings and what's really going on in their mind is through talking. And if you're not able to communicate freely with people and they're not able to communicate freely with you, then you don't understand each other. And at the end of the day, whether someone goes to jail for a year or not because of something they said to you that was offensive, you still have to live in the same society as them. You know, you still share the same world. You still share the same country. So the more you can understand each other, the better, basically. And anything other than that is essentially outright war. It's saying, I can't understand you, you can't understand me, we can't communicate, we will never be able to coexist peacefully, therefore the only option is essentially violence or war or just wielding power against each other, whether that's through the law or through the government or through whatever else. That is basically the only option you leave. When you decide that you can't communicate with somebody, that's all there is to it, you know, like is effectively violence, and that's not good. So, you know, I pray that this changes, that people's attitude towards it changes, because what I've found when I speak to people about this is initially they think, yeah, we have hate speech laws, so what, that's good, you shouldn't be allowed to say, you know, whatever to Marcus Rashford on Twitter, you shouldn't be able to, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then you talk about it with them more, and most people I find quite quickly are like, oh yeah, that is ridiculous, really. And the main thing is, you know, pointing out like who enforces this. Think of who is enforcing it. The same police force, by the way, that had 1 million reports about Jimmy Savile, 1 million reports about all these gangs that are abusing kids, 1 million reports about so many things of that nature, and were like, oh yeah, crazy, and just ignored it. The same police force that are always accused themselves of being racist or oppressive or fascist, or, you know, and the same police force that in reality in the world today a lot of the time are essentially acting as just corporate security. Like, so often they're not really there doing what's best for you. Those are the people, or one of the main groups of people, who are in charge of enacting these laws, of putting them into practice, who are in charge of the effect that they have on your life. Then there's the government, who, you know, I don't know anybody who likes the current government in the UK. I literally don't know anybody who does. I don't know anybody who remembers New Labour fondly. One of my brothers, I think, maybe does a bit, apart from the Iraq War, and some people I think do hold that belief, to be fair, that apart from the Iraq War, like, New Labour are okay. But for the most part, everybody hates them, and those are the people who brought the law into place. Look at who's in charge of maintaining that now. It's also a bit weird because it's not a conservative value at all, and they've maintained all of these laws and rules. And I think part of the problem is because a lot of younger people who are into this kind of oppressive stuff are very loud, and they make themselves very known and very public. And there's a lot of older people who, in my opinion, a lot of the time are kind of racist and are kind of hateful and are kind of ignorant and whatever else. And they overcompensate, and they're like, oh, yeah, hate speech laws, yeah, it sounds good, cool. That's what the kids want, you know. And it's like, I don't think it is. I really don't think it is, you know. I don't think that is what people by and large really actually want. I think it's something that people have been told is normal and people have come to accept is normal, and where, as with many of these things, fear kicks in, you know. You're guided by your fear. So you have the fear of, like, the idea that people can just, you know, say racist things, and people can be hateful, and people can be, and you're like, oh, it's horrible, we need to do something about it. And you don't think about what really is being done about it, and the negative effect that has on everybody, and how counterproductive it can be anyway. Again, a bit like with terrorism. Something like 9/11 happens and everyone's like, oh my god, that's fucking terrifying, that's so horrible, we have to do something. And I think most people can probably remember how they felt around that time or in the following years, and like, they probably weren't quite themselves. I think most of us, and I was pretty young at the time, but even growing up, like after that, like I was definitely guided by fear. Like I was being governed by my fear of terrorism, my fear of extremism, and I would have been way more likely on that basis to accept things that I probably shouldn't have accepted. But yeah, so I think the problem really is that most people don't care about this issue. They're not aware of it. They don't realise how strict it actually is in the UK. They don't realise it's stricter than pretty much anywhere else in the world in this specific regard. These laws do exist in most countries in Europe, but they're not really acted upon. I don't know what happened in the UK. I don't know what's going on. So I think it really is an issue of just raising awareness now, and I think now is a good time to do it. With all the shit that's been going on recently, the protests about the Queen and stuff, although they might not be perfect examples, as I said, because of the sort of aforementioned thing about keeping the peace. But yeah, I still think it's a good time for people to start talking about it. Well, any time is a good time for people to start talking about it, and I think awareness needs to be raised and discussions need to be had, and people need to be honest, like, about what these laws really mean, and not just think about whether or not they affect you right now, because they can and very likely will affect you in the future. And even if you don't see that effect and you don't feel it, indirectly they affect you anyway, because they affect the world around you. And it's really bad. An example, right? One of the things that bothers me the most about this is you can go on Netflix and you can watch things that contain... You can consume content that if you yourself created or put out into the world, rather than just receiving it on Netflix, this mainstream platform, you could go to prison for it, for stuff that you're allowed to watch. You're allowed to see it. It's like you're treated like a baby. It's like, no, let the actors and the comedians do it. If you do it, you'll go to prison. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. There's so many things, and I'm not just talking scripted dramas where it's clear that the whole world is fake. I'm talking comedy, people talking, just things that people say. There's so much, and on both sides of the political spectrum. I mean, there was a taxpayer-funded show on Russell Howard show, and I don't personally think taxpayer-funded shows should be particularly edgy or racy. I don't know if they should even exist anyway, but a taxpayer-funded BBC show, Russell Howard show, where they were talking about the phrase "kill Whitey" and how it was a good thing, and how essentially it's not really violent, but it kind of is as well. It's horrible. It was a horrible segment. It was trashy and stupid and horrible. You could, in theory, not that anyone ever seems to be, but you could be arrested for that. Similarly, Ricky Gervais's most recent special was really good, really funny. I was kind of amazed when I saw it, because I know that he's well aware of these laws, and the amount of things in that special he could have been arrested for would just be insane. But he's like a national hero. I don't think the police would ever go near it, because I think they know that would be the beginning of the end for these laws, potentially. But maybe not. People might just kind of quietly accept it and say, well, maybe he shouldn't have said that, maybe he was wrong, maybe it hurt someone's feelings, and not really actively contemplate what that means, what they're suggesting with that, and the kind of fake world that they're trying to achieve, and the grim reality of what they're actually going to get if they kind of bring that on. Yeah, cool. I don't know. I feel I was a bit erratic in this video. I didn't explain myself quite as clearly and calmly as I wanted to, because it just drives me insane, this. It's... yeah, I don't know. It hurts me. It really hurts me to see the way the UK is becoming. And I don't know. I had a lot I wanted to say in one video, and it just kind of like came out of me at once. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, hope I shed some light on something for someone at least. Take care, guys.